Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, author of Visualizing Happiness in Every Area of your Life and host of this podcast, Incredible Life Creator. And today I have Dr. Karen Kramer with me, known as Dr. Karen. Hey, Dr. Karen.
Hello, Kimberly. Good to be with you today.
Yes, I'm so excited to have you. I'm going to read your bio so people know who you are. Dr.
Okay.
Karen Kramer is a grief recovery expert who has transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of individuals around the globe since the early 1990s. With a profound understanding of the human mind, her true passion as a mindset coach, speaker, and author lies in helping navigate heart wrenching losses, griefs, and traumatic events. Dr. Karen draws her inspiration for healthy grief from personal experiences, including a broken neck, multiple deaths, two divorces, corporate downsizing, and various life challenges, as well as her son's remarkable health recovery and powerful client results. With a wealth of international coaching experience, a profound understanding of techniques that unlock the subconscious mind, and her intuitive abilities, healthy grief becomes her gift to help create a better world for everyone. So excited to hear your story. And I just named a bunch of, like, just one of those traumatic events would be enough, right? But uh, tell us your story. Tell us about you. How did you get to be doing what you're doing now?
I love it. And especially, where's the connection between happiness and grief? Yes, there is one. So I will. Thank you, Kimberly. I'll tell my story. So I had one of those days. I had one of those days where for those who don't know me, this is not my norm, but I hung up on my mom. I was yelling and screaming at my kids. I was cussing out my brothers. I had just lost it. And at the end of the aftermath, I stepped back and I'm like, okay, so I need some help. So I went to a therapist. By the way, as I continue to tell my story, this is my story. This is my experience. So as I talk about professionals, yes, they are there to help us. This is just the experience that I had at the time. So I went to a therapist and I walked out of a 45-minute session being labeled, in this case, with situational anxiety, which didn't mean much to me. And I was sent off to anxiety group, didn't help much that I can remember. So then I thought, well, I was in my early 40s at that time. So maybe early menopause, with all the emotions going on. So I went to my doctor. Within 2 minutes of describing what had led up to that day, she cut me off and prescribed me medications, to which I barely take ibuprofen. I just take vitamins. So nope, 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 resisted that. And after coming home, my husband's like, that destination spa you've always wanted to go to? This is a good time to do it, Karen. So I went, and Kimberly, it was so wonderful. 7 days away. It was getting up and exercising in the morning, eating healthy food, getting massages and facials and acupuncture. It was just heavenly. Then within 2 hours of being home, I was bickering with my loving husband again. Nothing to do with him and everything to do with me. So let me back up on what happened. On that day where I lost it, I was calling my mom to let her know that I had just put my beloved cat, my beloved 16-year-old cat, to sleep on that day. And those who've ever gone through that excruciating process will know that it is such a hard decision when you know that your beloved pet is at that end of life and you are doing a loving thing to let them go, but it's still a hard thing, especially after a long time of them in your life. But let's back up even more. A month prior to that, my father, at the age of 90, had passed away, and I had not dealt with the grief. So there I was a month later in the vet's office with my cat lovingly passing away, and the grief started to bubble up. Then I come home to share with my mom what had just happened. And before I do, she shares some information with me. I had some family drama associated with my dad's celebration of life that on a normal day probably would have irritated me, but probably I would have quickly gotten over it. But on that day, it was the last straw that just broke. And I went heavily into the grief process. I share that story because and that actually happened 12 years ago at the time of this recording, I actually carry that forward to talk about when we are going through grief, we respond in various different ways. At that point in time, I did not have the medical professionals to be able to support me and acknowledge the fact that this is just grief. This is a normal, natural process that I was going through. I didn't need drugs. I didn't need to be labeled. And yes, the 7 days away was nice, but it also wasn't helping me. It was dealing with the symptoms and wasn't helping me process through the grief. So, move ahead, Kimberly, is 6 years after that, which is 6 years ago at the time of this recording, the love of my life walked out of my life for Valentine's. And I said to myself, okay, I'm not going to go down the traditional route of professionals because at that time it didn't help me. So I thought I could coach myself through it because I've been in the field of leadership development and coaching for 30 years at that point in time. I could coach myself through it. Bad idea. And that's where I ended up getting into other modalities that not only helped me, but I turned them around to help other people. And I share that because 2.5 years ago, at the time of this recording, I lost my beloved older brother. The day afterwards, my mother, at 97 and a half years young, said to me, I wasn't planning to live this long. I'm curious what it's like to pass over. And I knew from the look in her eyes that she was looking for acceptance and support. So I said, Mom, what can I do? And within 2 weeks, she had passed. A month after that, my remaining brother was diagnosed with dementia. I was able to be present and engaging and supportive through the whole process of my brother who was ill and his passing, to my mom having that conversation with me, to my mom's passing, and even my other brother's diagnosis, and stepping back into the role I had as the head coach for an organization where my role was to be able to hold space for people who are going through very emotional events. And I was able to do it because I was utilizing the tools that I use with my own clients to be able to healthfully process through the grief rather than holding on to it and letting it eat us away inside. So that's the big story behind why healthy grief.
Right. So you're helping people with this every day, as far
Yes,
as the people who are, and it can be grief from anything. I mean, we have grief if we have a health issue, even, grief of losing health or relationships, or there's so many things. I know, with my parents and people around me that are older, they're grieving that, hey, I'm not remembering as many things anymore. And that's another thing, there's a lot of loss in life. And sometimes it is hard to deal with it. And a lot of times we do just push it under the rug and say, well, it is what it is, and we just don't know what to do with it.
right, Kimberly. And in multiple points that you made. One is grief is much more than death and dying. It's an everyday loss. And that actually is a tagline for healthy grief. So I actually decided to name it grief. I mean, just like happiness, right? Your book on happiness for me is everybody's going to experience some form of grief. We actually live in a grief adverse society. So I wanted to create a title that I knew everybody can relate to. And people who buy the book have been saying, like, oh, well, I'm not grieving, but I'm going to get this book for somebody who is grieving. And
Mhm.
then I love it. I had a gentleman who purchased the book and for somebody else. And then he read it and he goes, wow, I didn't realize I was grieving until I read Dr. Karen's book. So all of us have some form of grief. And to the point that you just made, Kimberly, again, grief is more than just death and dying. And what it is, I expand the definition of grief. So it's when we have a significant loss, where we have a deep sorrow, when what once was is no longer. What once was is no longer. So, to your point, it could be a relationship, it could be a career, it could be a financial situation, it could be our health, it could even be the loss of hopes and dreams. COVID is a perfect example.
Mhm.
So that was something that was on a mass scale where it involved disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief, by the way, is a type of grief where we experience some significant event that has a deep sorrow, but it's not traditionally recognized by society as a sorrow. So, for example, even with my story about losing a pet, now there's much more now with social media, people sharing about their lost beloved pet and people supporting them in such a way. But back in the day, if you lost your pet, like, why are you grieving over that? But now, disenfranchised grief is that type of grief where you, again, a significant event, deep sorrow over something that once was, is no longer. So if we take ourselves back to COVID, we have lost of security and safety. We didn't know what was going day to day. Do I have a mask or not? Is this person who just coughed, are they sick? Am I going to get sick if I have COVID? Am I going to die? Do I wear a mask? Do I not? Do I take the vaccine or not? There were so many different uncertainties. So loss of safety, loss of security, loss of social connection. So many different losses that people were having, and we're still seeing the after effects of that from those who were going through primary education, for example, during that period, and in many different cases, just the after effect about basically grief associated with the concept of COVID.
Yeah, and when I think about that, there are lots of those kinds of grief where people look at us and say, what's wrong with you? Why are you so upset about that? I mean, it could be anything. I mean, it could be something as silly as, the dog ate my teddy bear. It doesn't matter, because if it's something that was important to you and it's no longer, it's lost to you, then it still can be
Mhm.
upsetting. So how do we give ourselves the permission to grieve even when others around us kind of think we're silly, or, you know,
I love the
making
question.
too
Yeah.
much of it?
How do we give ourselves permission to grieve? The subtitle to healthy grief is normalizing and navigating loss in a culture of toxic positivity. So let's start there. In the book is actually for not only those of us who may be grieving something, but also how do we support grievers? So it's a very good question. How do we support grievers, as well as when we are grieving, to your question, how do we give ourselves grace? So first of all, let's talk about the concept of toxic positivity, which I know can relate to happiness, but toxic positivity can happen both on the griever side or the supporter side. So it is positivity in and of itself is good. It is toxic when it hinders that griever's ability to healthfully process grief. Again, it's toxic when it hinders the ability for that griever to process that grief. So, for example, if I'm a griever and I think, oh, well, I have to put on a happy, smiley face and pretend like nothing's going on, and I have to go to work and I have to work with the family and be with my friends and put on that happy, smiley face, when inside I want to cry, I want to take time away, or I go, which was me, I go in the bathroom and I cry it out in the bathroom, and then I come out when I'm working, or come out, with the family and put on that smile again. So that's a form for the griever. As a supporter, there are certain phrases that we might say, and actually one of them that I interviewed, there's 30 grief survivor case studies that are in the book. So I love their stories as well, where they talk about those things that occurred. And one gentleman, he was he unfortunately had lost his son, death by suicide in this case, when he was a teen at that. So this was 11 years later, and I was interviewing him for the book. And I said, what were some of those things that people said that were helpful or not so helpful? And he had a gentleman who said to him, well, your son's in a better place. Yeah, that was not helpful. And again, we may say, I'm sure I have said to people things that we want to help, the things that pop out of our mouth just don't help. So anyway, toxic positivity, I actually go through and I talk about various different phrases and things, why we as supporters might say certain things, and to think about what we may say that may help or hinder that process. So all that to say, back to your question, Kimberly, is what is it that we can do and acknowledge when we're going through the process? So first of all, I wanted to bring up toxic positivity because it may be one of those where I feel I can't share or be open about my grief because we do live in a grief avoidance culture where we're supposed to be happy, and when we're not happy, something's wrong with us. So that is another reason why I have the book there. So the biggest thing around being grief, and even as a supporter, is being seen, heard, and understood. Being seen, heard, and understood. So if I'm the griever and I'm in an environment where I don't feel as if I'm being seen, heard, or understood for what I'm going through, like, oh, Karen, your cat died, like, get over it. There's ways in which I can either remove myself from that situation or inform somebody, my cat may have died, but right now that's important to me right now. And if right now is not the time and place, not everybody can hold space for somebody to go through that grieving process. And that's okay too. But just acknowledge that, hey, this is what I'm going through right now. And if this environment or this person won't allow me to be seen, heard, and understood for what I'm feeling inside, then what environment will to be able to allow that to happen? Flip side, as a supporter, I ended up doing this, I think it was 2 or 3 nights ago, with a friend of mine who, um, and it's about holding space. And I talk more about that in the book too, and being holding space for somebody who ha- has a need to be seen, heard, and understood as part of their grieving process. And guess what? As a supporter, in many cases, as hard as it may feel, much of it is just sitting and listening. So the friend of mine who was grieving realized she hadn't really grieved over the loss of her sister who was passing. Husband is not doing well at this point in time. So I called her because I was wishing her a happy birthday. And even as she's going through this, some of the other emotions were just bubbling up. So I just sat there and listened. I just created space for her. And she just, probably for about 20 minutes, I was silent. In other words, I didn't say much of anything. And she just emoted, shared stories, emoted this or that. And she thanked me for holding that space for her. And just think about, whether it's grief or other things we're going through, about the power of just creating space, being silent and being present with somebody to hold space for whatever is coming up for them.
Beautiful. So I want to look at the other side of the coin now. We don't want to come to work or out to our family and just pretend like nothing's happening. At the same time, we need to be able to function. So I remember when my fiance died, had only been working maybe 1 or 2 days a week. And but a few weeks after he died, I took a position that was 5 days a week. Why? Because I didn't want to be home by myself. I mean, the cat was there. She was very supportive, but um, I knew I would just sit and just cry for hours. And so I actually put myself in that situation so that I would actually have to not be crying, because you can't be crying and seeing patients. So I did that purposely. So there's got to be a balance, because you can't be just everywhere and just totally falling apart in tears in every situation, especially in public. So where's that balance? How do we do that? We don't want to stuff it, but we want to process it, but we also have to be out in the world.
Balance.
And nobody wants to be around someone that's constantly crying.
No, no. And you're very good point. And I actually, you're touching upon a chapter in there as well. Distraction is one of the things, just as you described. So finding some of those things that are even temporarily are distracting. So one of the things you mentioned is going back for a job, is it distracted you? Another technique, and actually this was from a client of mine who mentioned husband husband had passed, and temporarily she just had a belief that he was on a business trip and that he would be back. That's another form of distraction. Now, these taken to, and there's more of them. I'd have to go into my book to remember all of them. Opportunities where, yes, in the moment, we can't walk around and be in our own muck of the sorrow. We need some uh, periods of time, even in that moment. When I say like that initial moment, depending upon what it is, that initial moment, the 24 hours, the day, the week afterwards, where we can't just constantly be in this state of grief and sorrow, which causes so much stress and pain on our body. We need some relief, even if it's temporarily, like to humor is another thing. So whether it is watching a funny video, it's going out on with friends or something, going to work, pretending that that loved one is just away on a business trip. Yes, those things are important, and that balance. So a question about balance. If, for example, somebody is going back to work and constantly going back to work, and at some point in time is distracting themselves from not facing the grief, then it's taken too far. If I have lost a loved one and I pretend that they're away on a business trip for months and months, again, I'm living in a state of denial, right? So there are things that we can do to create some balance so that we are not constantly in that muck, and also not to the other extreme about complete denial or complete avoidance. When my father had passed away, and yes, it was a month later, I was in this state of denial about my emotions. I was disconnected from it. And there's reasons why that was occurring because of some limiting beliefs I had from when I was younger. And again, my story is in there as well. And those are some of the things that I work with my clients on, because when we are, and I have a cup in front of me, so perfect talking about it, is when we have some kind of grief event, it's like we have, if somebody was to bump this, and right now, or even a coffee mug, that's out there, a coffee mug. If somebody was to bump this and I had coffee on it, I may end up with coffee on me. If somebody was to bump it and I had tea on it, I would end up with tea on me. The concept is, it's not the fault of the person who bumps me or me because I'm holding this. The point is, because it was bumped, whatever's inside of it is going to spill out. And that analogy has been out there, and I've used it as well to talk about resilience, because when life bumps us, right? When we have a setback, when we have a challenge, which could be whether it is, I can't find my keys in the morning, right? Or lost, major things that happen, whatever is in our cup is what spills out. So when I'm working with my clients, I'm working on clearing out their cup. Whatever past traumas, triggers, limiting beliefs are in there, that's what's going to spill out. And so, proverbial to clean that cup, that's what I did between my father's passing and when I had the series of losses, 12 years later, 10 years later at that time, with my family members. I wasn't triggered as much around my grief because I was dealing with what was in my proverbial cup. I know I extended on behind your original question, Kimberly. So
Well,
let's
that
come
was
back.
great though. Thank you. So, you said our society is like a Pollyanna society. Just be happy, right? And but life is a sine wave. There's happy things, sad things, happy things. It's just life. It's just the way it is. So if we have children, how do we want to teach them to deal with grief? How do we want to teach them to deal with setbacks?
Mhm. Perfect question. There will be various different losses when our children are younger. And when that happens, that's a perfect time to be able to have conversations about the losses. And so using these natural events that may come up, for example, Maybe there is a feeling of loss because a friend, I've lost a friendship because I no longer have that friendship, or I've lost a friend because they have moved to another state or another school, or I'm feeling a sense of loss because I've moved from this grade to that grade, or now elementary school to middle school to high school, or I'm feeling a loss because I really thought I was going to get a good grade on this test and I got a horrible grade. I thought I was going to be picked for the sport team. I wasn't. I thought I was going to be picked for the play. I wasn't. So there's various different types of losses. So first of all, again, back to my definition of grief, any form of loss, okay, which can, again, for a child, okay, or teen, their losses may be different from what we as adults or parents may think of a loss. But if they are having a deep sorrow or deep response to that, that is a significant loss for them. And so to be able to help them process through loss at that point in time, even if it's the loss of a friendship, is going to help them understand, how do I then develop my ability to process through various different losses that even may be more significant losses later on. Right. And in healthy grief, that's exactly the 5-stage process I have. It can be taught and used for any situation, for any age. So for example, I have it laid out so it's easy to remember, from what are you thinking? Head. What are you feeling? Okay, heart. So what am I thinking and feeling? For some of us, when we approach concepts associated with grief, or some people focus starting with the emotion, other people start with the logic, the head. Either way, what am I thinking? What am I feeling? So head and heart. Then down to the feet. And again, I do this pointing down to the feet. What are some action steps to take? Now, the actions may be things like, today, maybe I get out of bed before, like during COVID, maybe I get out of bed before 12. Maybe I actually take a shower and put on some clothes. Whatever those action steps are, they need to be appropriate for the person and the certain type of grief. They don't need to be major things like, I need to go out and change the world by, like, what action steps can I take today? So thinking, feeling, action steps, hands is the fourth. What support do I need today? Now, that support could be something like, hey, it would be really nice if I had somebody who can come in and clean my bathroom, or clean my dishes, go grocery shopping for me, mow my lawn, take the kids somewhere. So what support do you need today? And then thinking about the eyes, which is, what is the future vision? And it depends upon where somebody is in the grief process as to what the future vision may be like. It may be, at the end of the day, what do I want today to look like? Right? Or it could be by the end of the week or end of the month, or it could be going into the next year, or somebody who's going through divorce. What do I want my future to look like once I finished uncoupling this marriage that I once had? So what's that future vision? So again, it's the 5 stages, and I actually lead through with various different questions. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? What action steps? What support? And what does the future look like? And again, those are things that you could also use to help a child work through a loss, even if it is the loss of a friendship, a pet turtle, a going through a different grade, whatever it is. Easy steps to help them build that resilience muscle.
Yeah, I love the way you use the actions for that because it's easy to remember.
Yes.
And when you were talking about, the future vision, I know when you're like really down deep in grief, you can't even really think about the next 5 minutes. You can't even imagine being there the next 5 minutes. So, how do you help people get out of that little hole or spot or pit, if you will, to actually come out and be able to peek over the edge and say, oh, yeah, there is actually a future there? How do you get them from there to actually seeing a future? Because when you're sad or upset or grieving, you don't seem to see any of that.
Right. A couple different ways. Like, one on much different in the way in which I work. So I'm going to keep it to more at the level of the book. One of the ways with the 30 grief survivor case studies that are in here, which by the way are broken up into 7 different categories, like death and dying, divorce, relationship, estrangements, identity issues, health issues, career changes, to trilogy, multiple different losses that are there. And so the value of having those in the book is that I found that individuals gravitate to different stories. And in the stories, they are case studies, because what I have done is then laid the 5 steps that I just mentioned to you. I layer that so that the reader can understand how that person, what were they thinking? What were they feeling? What action steps did they take? What support did they get? And what was their process about what was the future vision for them, right? So that's one way and one value in the book that I've received a lot of feedback on, that they're able to relate to certain stories, to know that, one, I am not the only one who's grieving. Other people have gone through this too, and other people have found other ways to get over that, to peek over it and move forward in their life. And by the way, those who are in the book, many of them are clients, not all of them are those that also are healthfully enough through the process. So by writing their own story, I wasn't spiraling down into the grief again. So that's one way, is the value of knowing I'm not alone and connecting with the other stories. Another way, and actually that chapter going through focus. So by the way, I led you through what each of those are. It actually does go by it's the healthy grief framework. So gathering, relating, so involving in action, ease with support, and focus. So GRIEF, that's part of that model, the healthy grief framework. So when it comes to focusing on the future, it's asking, in the book, is a series of questions that on that one day may not make sense to them. The next day may make more sense to them. And just as I mentioned about the focus, and even around the action taking, it may be something as simple as, what do we think we want for 5 minutes? And maybe focusing on the future is just giving me 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just to feel crappy in the moment. Let life suck and let me just emote. Okay, good. Go for it. I've done that with clients, like, okay, set a timer, give yourself permission to just be whatever emotion it is. And when the alarm goes off, then decide, what emotion do you want to be in next? So that example right there is just both an action step as well as the future. Just let me be right now. Let me be in the muck.
Mhm.
It's okay not to be okay. It's not okay to stay there. And that is another quote that I have in there. It's okay to not be okay. It's not okay to stay there. So knowing that grief is a process. It's not like, hello, you have to, by 3 months or 1 month or 1 week, you have to be done with your grief and move on. No, it's a process for us. But knowing that we are moving through this process, and we have an idea about, what are we thinking? What are we feeling? What action steps am I taking today? What support do I need? And what does the future look like for me, even if it's in the next 5 minutes? It's just moving us forward through that process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if people wanted to connect with you or get the book, where do they go? How do they find it?
Easiest way, even though the book is actually on Amazon, the easiest way to do it is actually go to my website, which is drkarenkramer.com. So just as you see on my screen, the DRKARENKRANER.com, and up above, the first ribbon you're going to see is Discover Healthy Grief. That then takes you to the book trailer, as well as more information about the book. There's even on there is there's a foreword by Jack Canfield that's in here. So you get to see the full interview that I did with Jack Canfield. That's on that site as well. And then it'll take you directly to your Amazon purchasing options that are there.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So
You're
now I
welcome.
have a personal question for you. What gives you the most happiness and fulfillment in your life at this point?
Ah, I love it. So My pets are the big thing for me. The sunshine, I'm a California sunshine girl. And my children, honestly, my children and my grandchildren, those are the things that give me the greatest joy. Mm,
Right. Thank you.
mm.
And thanks for being on the podcast today and sharing this. This is so important for people to be able to, navigate through this grief process.
Yes. Thank you for inviting me, Kimberly. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So I have one last question. What is your
Mhm.
best advice on living an incredible, amazing life?
Hmm. My best advice to living an incredible and amazing life. Well, even as I think about this, is clean your cup, is the more, and actually, this is a cup that my mom created. She was a potter, so I've been drinking out of it. But metaphorically, energy that we carry around in our metaphorical cup has much to do with the life that we create. So if we are truly carrying around the grief, the limits we place on ourselves, those past traumas, those triggers, and they are weighing us down, then it's more difficult and challenging, and we have to force ourselves and will ourselves to be more happy, okay, be more joyful. Versus when we are cleaning out that energy that's in our cup that's weighing us down, we're coming naturally from a place of energetic happiness and joy. It comes natural to us. So a lot of the work that I do with my clients is doing that deep cleaning work and a quick and easy way to be able to clear that energy so you are coming from that place of joy, which, by the way, is our true natural state of being, joy and happiness.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Karen. We'll
You're
talk to you
welcome.
again soon.
Okay, thank you.